I begin with a proposition that I think you won't find controversial. Shakespeare had a way with words. You'll have your favourite examples of Shakespearean eloquence. I can't resist regaling you with one or two of mine. Something I react to is the easy conjunction of the sublime with the everyday. When Phaeton, for instance, features as a wagoner in the context of Juliet's allusion to the reckless death drive implicit in passion. The 18th century, appalled by this lapse of decorum, corrected wagoner to charioteer and lost the rhythm as well as the immediacy. And then there are the big speeches. I can't get enough of Othello's plumed troop, Macbeth's trumpet-tongued angels, Leontes and the spider, or Claudius as a treacherous, lecherous, kindless villain. How extraordinary, then, to find Shakespeare in what many have taken to be his own voice, apparently tongue-tied. Sonnet 85, which is on your sheet and which I plan to dwell on a little bit, presents its author as silent in the presence of a rival poet who seems to have the arts at his fingertips. Propriety renders the sonneteer mute before the triumph of such another. My tongue-tied muse in manners holds her still, while comments of your praise, richly compiled, reserve their character with golden quill and precious phrase by all the muses filed. I think good thoughts, whilst others write good words, and like unlettered clerks still cry, Amen, to every hymn that able spirit affords in polished form of well-refined pen. Hearing you praised, I say, 'tis so, 'tis true, and to the most of praise add something more, but that is in my thought, whose love to you, though words come hindmost, holds his rank before. Then others for the breath of words respect, me for my dumb thoughts, speaking in effect. The sonneteer admires the impressive work of his rival, polished to a high gleam by all the muses. He's like a curate who can't read, reduced to muttering, how true, amen, as the parson pours forth his hymns. He can't compete, he can only remain speechless in such company, however deep his love. Well, it's all a pose, of course. The sonnet is exceptionally accomplished, structured as it is in a series of contrasting quatrains. The first characterises the dazzling work of the rival in metaphors of wealth, to be preserved for the future as incorruptible coin. The manner mimics, I think, the rival's slightly ponderous style, arcane phrasing and repetitive descriptors, richly golden, precious. We get it. The second quatrain introduces the lover as bereft of skills, a poor parish clerk confined to uttering responses, while the celebrant priest takes centre stage. His unlettered vocabulary leads to a more impoverished repetition, good thoughts, good words. But while the lover stutters out his banal endorsements, 'tis so, 'tis true, his feelings, beyond words, rank higher than praise. Then let's admire the rival's fluency, but in the event, the final couplet proclaims, the sonneteer's silent devotion will speak louder than words. The sonnet, that is, juxtaposes words and thoughts. Words we know about, but when it comes to it, what is a thought, especially a dumb thought? If we choose to define thought by its difference from feeling, ideas from emotions, then a dumb thought is a cogitation that's withheld. Give thy thoughts no tongue, urges Polonius, meaning don't say what you think, don't divulge your reflections. The assumption is that such ruminations are already formulated in words or images, as symbols, but withheld. Is the sonneteer withholding a train of reasoning or reflection that just isn't worthy to be uttered? No, I think not. They're good thoughts, but they don't find their way into words. Instead, I think thought here is closely akin to feeling, an awareness or a recollection. He was disposed to mirth, but on the sudden a Roman thought hath struck him, Cleopatra complains. This is not cogitation, but the momentary intrusion of something completely different. The same ambiguity, when you think about it, prevails in modern English. On the one hand, thought as intellectual activity, the life and thought of Jacques Lacan, thought for the day. On the other, the very thought of you, and I forget to do the little ordinary things that everyone ought to do. I don't think Ella Fitzgerald has in mind a Cartesian meditation on the strengths and weaknesses of the beloved. I'm living in a kind of daydream, she goes on. Thought in that sense is more like attention, heed, inner foregrounding. Sonnet 30, which you don't have, characterises both conditions. In the sessions of sweet, silent thought, the remembrance of things past brings nothing but misery. But if the while I think on thee, dear friend, all losses are restored and sorrows end. The thought of the friend comes as a sudden switch of psychic energy, not a philosophical process. I've been puzzling over our hero all day, trying to decide whether he's cogitating or having a sudden switch of attention. And I think it's both. I just think this is brilliant, because it seems to me it catches the genius who's got the quill in his hand and is thinking about what he's going to write, and then the turn of the head and the slightly open mouth suggests that a sudden thought has struck him. And that, of course, is how genius works. Well, you take your pick, but that's how it seems to me. Where are we? If I'm right about that second meaning of thought as not cogitation, but a sudden swerve of the mind, Sonnet 85 exemplifies with great originality a familiar Shakespearean convention. In love, words come hindmost. I love you more than words can wield the matter, affirms Goneril, lying, but fully aware of the convention. Well, what does the old fool expect? Tell me, my daughters, he commands them, which of you shall we say doth love us most? What can you say? He asks Cordelia. Nothing, she replies firmly. Lear should know better than to think that love can be told or laid out in words to win prizes. Juliet, who isn't lying, could have explained where he's gone wrong. Unfold our shared happiness with the music of your tongue, urges Romeo on their wedding day. I can't, she answers. Or at least she doesn't put it quite like that. This is what she says. Conceit, more rich in matter than in words, brags of his substance, not of ornament. They are but beggars that can count their worth, but my true love is grown to such excess I cannot sum up some of half my wealth. More matter with less art is what the mind in love conceives. There it is again in Juliet's speech. Ornament, precious phrases, golden quills miss the point. To tell is to count in early modern English. Only beggars can count what they possess. If you can tell it, it's not worth telling. True love can't be summed up. It exceeds what's speakable or calculable. If it be love indeed, tell me how much, challenges the Egyptian queen. There's beggary in a love that can be reckoned, replies Antony, picking up the double meaning of tell as he joins in the game. I'll set a bourne how far to be beloved, she teases. Then must thou needs find out new heaven, new earth. The known world can't accommodate an immeasurable passion, a desire that can't be told because the known language can't name it. Well, it's a convention, but conventions stick when there's something in them. Oddly enough, a similar thought came, apparently independently, to Roland Barthes, most Lacanian of critics in A Lover's Discourse. The more I experience, this is also on your sheet, the speciality of my desire, the less I can name it. To the precision of the target corresponds a quivering of the name. What is proper to desire can produce only an impropriety of the utterance. Of this linguistic failure, there remains only a single trace, the word adorable. The French resonances of proper and improper are lost in translation. What's proper to desire, its own, what belongs to it, produces only an inappropriateness in language, linguistic error. But adorable doesn't do it. Adorable, the amorous discourse continues, is the pointless trace of an exhaustion, the exhaustion of language. From word to word, he goes on, I wear myself out to put into other words the sameness of my image, to tell improperly, inappropriately, the property and propriety of my desire. A journey at whose end my final philosophy can only be to recognize and to practice tautology. The adorable is what is adorable. Or again, I adore you because you are adorable. I love you because I love you. But what does adorable mean? The correct translation of the word, Barthes says, would be the Latin ipse, the same. C'est lui, c'est bien lui, en personne. Well, here again, Shakespeare got there first, or somewhere very like it, in Two Gentlemen of Verona, when Lucetta assesses Julia's suitors as her mistress, names them. Lucetta, wittily dismissive of all the others, suddenly turns coy when it comes to Proteus. And why, Julia asks, does her waiting woman think Proteus is the best? Lucetta, unable to account for her giggles, has recourse to tautology. I have no other but a woman's reason. I think him so because I think him so. The practice of tautology is developed as an art form in Sonnet 84. Who is it that says most, which can say more than this rich praise, that you alone are you, in whose confine immured is the store which should example where your equal grew? Lean penury within that pen doth dwell, that to his subject lends not some small glory. But he that writes of you, if he can tell that you are you, so dignifies his story. And here even the wordplay resembles the Lover's Discourse, stressing as it does the penury of the pen. The totality of the material for making your equal is already stored in you. In consequence, there can't be a twin, a semblance, another like you, but only the same. You, the object of my desire. All this effort goes into theorizing and bypassing the limits of language. And each time the journey comes back to the same place. It can't be done. What can be named is the limits themselves. What can be told is what language can't do. And what it can't do is capture love. Well, we knew that. All those sonnets and lyrics and pop songs keep on trying precisely because the definitive account has never been arrived at. And why? Because love exceeds the Cartesian cogito, the consciousness that's constructed out of language. Love, like psychoanalysis itself, involves the body. It's visceral. Madam, you have bereft me of all words, exclaims Bassanio when Portia hands him herself and all she possesses. Only my blood speaks to you in my veins. Love reaches back into what Lacan calls the real. It retains something of the bond between the little human organism and its first carer, an element from the prehistory of the subject, when nothing had a name, a condition prior to difference, before the possibility of separation, when the carer was not an independent object of attention, but continuous with me, the self-same. I should say, in parenthesis, that this infancy in the real is not so much a chronological moment as a perpetual possibility. In practice, of course, there's no time when babies are not named by others, differentiated, talked to, or spoken of by their doting parents. It's a girl, the midwife might say, although without expecting the new arrival to make much of that announcement. But with that proviso, structurally speaking, the infant inhabits the real. I don't share Slavoj Žižek's idealist belief that the real doesn't exist. I think it exists and it's real. It subsists in the organism that we continue to be. It's just that it doesn't exist for the subject, the speaking being we become. We can't acknowledge it or discuss it because we don't know anything about it. In the subject, the real is superseded, but not entirely surmounted. Among its traces in love is the objet quotidien. I think we've visited that already today. The something I love in you more than you. I think I'm recapitulating Peter's... Can't hear it too often, though, can I? The objet quotidien, I'm willing to concede, doesn't exist, but what does exist is what doesn't exist is the cause, even so, and the object cause of desire. Adorable, Barthes says in the same fragment of A Lover's Discourse, adorable tries to designate that sight in the other that my desire attaches itself to in a special way. But this sight cannot be designated, named, identified. I shall never, the lover allows, know anything about it. My language will always grope, stutter, to try to speak it. We shall never know anything about the real either, but we know about the moment when it begins to be left behind, renounced and replaced by the symbol. In one instance, we know about it from the record Freud leaves in the story of little Ernst from Beyond the Pleasure Principle. His mother and his admiring grandfather agreed that Ernst had arrived at linguistic difference when he threw away his toy with a childish effort at gone and retrieved it with a triumphant there. The game simulated what Freud calls the child's great cultural achievement, the instinctual renunciation, that is, the renunciation of instinctual satisfaction in allowing his mother to go away without protesting. By signifying this loss in a game and in words, Ernst was able to master it, Freud proposes. But the mastery occurs by recourse to symbolization, which is to say to an analogue, to another parallel form. The signifier is always other. I think we've covered this ground already, but there's no harm in repeating it. The signifier is always other, belongs to the big other. And when the real is at stake, the words derived from the big other don't do it justice, they miss it. Only beggars can tell their words. The pen is penurious. From word to word I wear myself out to put into other words the sameness of my image. Cordelia can't heave her heart into her mouth, not because she's obtuse or embarrassed by her fluent and lying sisters, not because she's decided to give her thoughts no tongue, but because hearts and mouths are distinct organs, and what occupies the foreground in one can't find a satisfactory place in the other. I love your majesty, she says, according to my bond. No more, no less. The claim isn't grudging, even if Lear can't see that. Instead, the bond is huge, although the old fool doesn't realise it. Mend your speech a little, he thunders. But her speech is not broken, or no more broken than any other utterance that seeks to name the unnameable. What can't be named is not confined to desire. In Camera Lucida, Barthes becomes absorbed by the element of the photograph that's not part of the project, the accidental detail that he calls the punctum. While the design of the image is to make a declaration, I can't say point because the punctum isn't the point. The image is designed to convey a meaning, but it's what can't be designated that disturbs his equanimity. The incidental punctum now becomes the point because, he says, it does not find its sign, its name. It cries out in silence. The incapacity to name is a good symptom of disturbance. Well, now we get my Hamlet bit. It's quite brief. It'll soon be over, but I have to have my pen as well. Hamlet, too, is baffled by what fails to find a name, what cries out in silence amid all the signifying noise. And I haven't put this on your sheet because at least half the people here know it off by heart already. "'Tis not alone my inky cloak, good mother, nor customary suits of solemn black, nor windy suspiration of forced breath, no, nor the fruitful river in the eye, nor the dejected haviour of the visage, together with all forms, moods, shapes of grief, that can denote me truly. These indeed seem, but they are actions that a man might play. But I have that within, which passes show, these but the trappings and the suits of woe." That within, undesignated, is the point. In a post-romantic novelistic age, that within is often taken to indicate a Cartesian interiority à bon la lettre. People have wanted to name that within as something contained inside the speaker, as if it's a little box in a Russian doll, perhaps. Yes, a little Russian doll. I thought of that suddenly. Character, the unique individuality that is the sensitive prince. I don't agree with that reading, not only because I think it's anachronistic, but also because it seems to me that the logic of the speech leads to something else. Grief, too, is visceral, and it's hard to find signifiers that do it justice. Hamlet is observing all the customary practices of mourning. He's wearing black, he's sighing, weeping, downcast. But these external rituals could be observed by an actor. They are other than his grief. They belong to the big other, the symbolic order that society subscribes to. Grief hits the human organism in ways these symbolic practices miss. Apes, we now know, feel grief. Elephants even feel empathy with sadness and rally round orphans of their own kind. As speaking beings, we devise conventions to denote mourning and, to a degree, allay the pain by bringing the loss into the light of day. But we also inherit a capacity for mourning that precedes the signifiers and escapes denotation. Death. Lacan makes in his study of Hamlet. Have you heard enough about Lacan's study of Hamlet to sink the Titanic? Anyway, death. This hasn't had, it's been mentioned, but in passing, I think. Death, he says there, the death of a loved one makes a hole in the real. We do what we can to fill the gap, but only the totality of the signifier can do it, the entire play of the symbolic register, he says. And if there's a single signifier missing, if a convention is ignored or defied, folklore conjures spectres to fill it. Gertrude's hasty and incestuous wedding defies every signifier in the book. And we know, although Hamlet doesn't yet, that the paternal ghost is already pacing the battlements of Elsinore. Only the totality of the symbolic order can repair the loss. But the master signifier that Lacan calls the phallus is permanently elsewhere. It belongs to the big other, it can't be found. The mastery we achieve is always relative. Little Ernst takes a degree of control when he names his mother's absence, but that doesn't stop her going away. In other words, it's a dangerous expression when it comes to Lacan, but I'll risk it since we're alone together. In other words, the death of a loved one evokes the originary separation that marks the entry of the subject into the order of language and culture. The real is there, but it's dead to the subject, or playing dead and liable to stir from time to time. The loss of the real can be felt, but it can't be repaired by the signifier, and it can be signified only by recourse to the otherness of the symbolic, only, that is, by the trappings and the suits of woe or actions that a man might play. Whatever noise these actions make in the speech, however eloquent Hamlet is on the conventions he's observing, he's silent on that within. He insists on it, but he says nothing about it. However they judge his delay in killing the king, students of his character would have to admit that Hamlet is rarely lost for words. But about that within, there is nothing to say, because it's not a list of characteristics. Sensitivity, melancholy, thoughtfulness, and all the rest. Instead, it's what can't be shown in behaviour or words. Grief touches the unnameable real. The real. We don't know anything about it, or not empirically at least. But that doesn't prevent psychoanalysis from speculating on it. For one thing, it's the conjectural source of what Freud's correspondent in Civilization and Its Discontents calls an oceanic feeling of oneness with the world. The newborn child does not at first distinguish the self from an outside realm that is the source of its sensations until inevitable separations from the mother force a confrontation with reality. That's the story of little Ernst. He moves from the real to a reality structured by language. The bond with the first carer, Freud maintains, explains the illusion lovers have of unity with each other. You and I are one, they insist, all evidence to the contrary notwithstanding. At the same time, Lacan adds, life in the real is exciting. Personally, he says, I've never looked at a baby and had the sense that there was no outside world for it. It's plain to see that a baby looks at nothing but that it excites it. And that is the case precisely to the extent that it doesn't yet speak. The child doesn't have to recognise otherness to respond positively to light, colour, touch, movement. The new horizons are a lot more thrilling than the womb. But they can also be terrifying. What can't be named can't be explained or explained away. It's anxiety that little Ernst does his best to overcome with his symbolic toy and his two barely formed words. When Richard II leaves for Ireland, the Queen faints and shrinks from a nameless and inexplicable woe. And this is on the other side, I think, of your sheet. And you're going to have to work now, it's hard. Okay, King's gone to Ireland, and she's miserable. How to account for it? I know no cause, she says, why I should welcome such a guest as grief, save bidding farewell to so sweet a guest as my sweet Richard. But that's not it, she says. The future holds something else, something, nothing nameable, some unborn sorrow, ripe in fortune's womb, is coming towards me, and my inward soul, with nothing, trembles. There it is again, the inward soul. Interiority? Maybe. But the feeling is wordless, unattributable. At line 31, thought, on thinking on no thought I think, makes me with heavy nothing faint and shrink. I think that takes some unpacking after a long, hard day, don't you? Her mind, she says, is frightened by dwelling on no thought I think, something unthought, not a rational Cartesian reflection, but the exact opposite, a heavy nothing. 'Tis nothing but conceit, my gracious lady. Conceit, conception, fantasy. By telling her she's imagining things, Bushy is doing his best to cheer her up, but the Queen doesn't agree that her imagination is working overtime. 'Tis nothing less, she retorts, nothing could be less so. Imagined woes are prompted by something nameable, but at line 36, nothing hath begotten my something grief. Or something has caused it, but I don't know what. Although it's mine, it's in reversion, not yet back in my possession. That's a curious phrase from our point of view. In reversion is a legal term in the period meaning in the process of reverting to the original owner, as if something is returning to the Queen after an absence. Perhaps the stirring of a memory, long forgotten, of a fear that has no identifiable object, unspecified because prior to difference. As if to represent the lack of clarity, in the last two lines the wordplay comes thick and fast on what as that which, what as an unanswered question, and what meaning no. What it is that is not yet known what, I cannot name, 'tis nameless woe, I what. I don't yet know what it is that I know. I can't name it, but I know it, nameless as it is. I think we're in Donald Rumsfeld territory. This is a known unknown, possibly with a hint of an unknown. In hindsight, we can call the Queen's conceit, that isn't a conceit, a premonition of disaster. In the light of our grasp of dramatic irony, we can see that Shakespeare is prolonging the suspense. Richard has left the stage, but not the story. Things will get worse. But none of that takes away from the extraordinary play of absent presences, somethings and nothings, and thinking on unthought thoughts that characterise the Queen's distress. In a passage that has attracted Zizek's attention, Bushy mansplains the something and nothing as visual, distorted by tears, and there follows the passage I've skipped about anamorphic pictures that Ida Rai makes shapes out of confusion. These shapes she's seeing from the wrong angle are things imaginary, he insists, illusions. In other words, she's hallucinating an unreal cause of anxiety. Lacan, who was greatly interested in anamorphosis, as we know, also had things to say about hallucination. I don't think Zizek has been quite so fluent on those. The Wolfman, who denied the possibility of castration, was subject to a frightening visual illusion when he was 5. In his own words, as reported by Freud, I was playing in the garden near my nurse and was carving with my pocket knife in the bark of one of the walnut trees that come into my dream as well. Suddenly, to my unspeakable terror, I noticed that I had cut through the little finger of my right or left hand, so that it was only hanging by its skin. I felt no pain, but great fear. I didn't venture to say anything to my nurse, who was only a few paces distant, but I sank down on the nearest seat and sat there, incapable of casting another glance at my finger. Well, I need hardly remind you what Freud made of this, although it's interesting that he sees the Wolfman's predicament as contradictory. At one and the same time, the child denied the possibility of castration and also allowed that he was already castrated like a girl. But Freud reads the hallucination of the cut finger as the insistence of a third state, an older and deeper awareness, which, he says, did not as yet even raise the question of the reality of castration. That older awareness goes back in Freud's account to the primal scene witnessed by the child at 1.5, when it was apparent that the penis could disappear. Some sort of hardly definable knowledge, something as it were preparatory to an understanding, must have been at work in the child at the time, Freud surmises. Well, perhaps it's this reference to an older and deeper awareness that prompts Lacan's slightly different emphasis. Lacan stresses the little boy's account of his unspeakable terror and the indifference to his normally beloved old nurse. We generally think of hallucination as fulfilling a wish. You're hungry and you imagine food. Desire generates daydreams of gratification. But the Wolfman's was another sort of illusion altogether. The fear of castration, which for Lacan, as you know, means entry into the symbolic, erupts into the 5-year-old's consciousness in the form of something seen. The result is a panic-stricken reversion to the real. He is then overwhelmed, Lacan says, by a feeling of catastrophe that's so inexpressible that he doesn't even dare to talk of it to the person by his side, the nurse. What he daren't talk about is this. It is as if this person, to whom he immediately refers all of his emotions, were annulled. The other no longer exists. There is a sort of immediate external world of manifestations perceived in what I by Lacan, will call a primitive real, a non-symbolized real. The possibility of the symbol, as Lacan puts it, which entails a separation from the real that cannot and must be faced, propels the little boy back into infancy, a world without difference, prior to otherness, but full of a terror that can't be spoken. As Lacan reformulates this episode, he keeps coming back to it. This is the suspension of all possible speech, and what is refused in the symbolic order re-emerges in the real as hallucination. That is, the reappearance in the real of what the subject has refused. Well, coming back to Shakespeare, what takes shape in the mind of Richard's queen, if shape it may be called, that shape has none, is what the subject refuses. A separation from Richard, more absolute than she has rational grounds for expecting, as well as a concomitant loss of identity that parallels his own. It's a really interesting play, Richard II, much underrated in my view. I have no name, no title, the deposed king insists. No, not that name was given me at the font. Well, the queen is just called queen in the speech prefixes and the dialogue, and critics miss a crucial point when they draw from outside Shakespeare's text to call her Isabel, to reassert the name given her at the font. This terror of a condition where the symbolic order has no purchase, where the subject as queen faces destruction, summons up a something that can't be named, indistinguishable from a nothing, an unthought thought that makes her faint and shrink. That condition is both in reversion to her and in her possession. The wolfman was lucky, at least for the moment. At last I calmed down, he says, took a look at the finger and saw that it was entirely uninjured. Richard's queen is not so fortunate. Within 20 lines, the return of Bolingbroke and the desertion of the nobles to the challenger give a name to the queen's fear, as Richard's downfall becomes inevitable. Now hath my soul brought forth her prodigy, she exclaims, completing the metaphor of the fateful pregnancy that's made her heavy. Richard II is one of the texts that shows Shakespeare's way with words at its most persuasive. The play includes any number of soaring set pieces. Gaunt's sceptred isle speech, Richard eager to sit upon the ground and tell sad stories of the death of kings, his comparison of his prison to the world, the deposition scene in its entirety. I leave it to you to conjure up your favourite passages, but amid all this eloquence, the queen stutters. Bushy's fluency on anamorphosis has captured our attention, but the queen is not convinced. It may be so, she concedes, but yet my inward soul persuades me it is otherwise. Howe'er it be, I cannot but be sad. Like the parish clerks in Sonnet 85, her limited vocabulary can't stand up to Bushy's eloquence. But is eloquence always right? Gilles Deleuze, most Lacanian of anti-psychoanalytic theorists, has an answer to that question in his essay. He stuttered. Deleuze doesn't mention Shakespeare there. He's more interested in modernism and what it can do that's new. But I think what he says casts light on our theme, even so. Anyone, Deleuze says, can rehearse old memories, invent stories, deliver opinions. Some people even acquire style and can come by the means to earn a living as celebrated writers. Good for them. But, he goes on, and this is quoting Deleuze, when it's a matter of digging under the stories, cracking open the opinions, and reaching regions without memories, when the self must be destroyed, it's certainly not enough to be a great writer, and the means must remain forever inadequate. Style becomes non-style, so that one can reach the limits of language itself. And he quotes with approval a Russian novelist and critic whose modernist work endorses fragments, allusions, strivings, investigations. Do not try to find a well-polished sentence or a perfectly coherent image in it, he says. What is printed on the pages is an embarrassed word, a stuttering. I don't want to go all out for stuttering. I like well-polished sentences and coherent images, although I can see why the early 20th century had to break with them. I like Shakespeare's elegance, and I wouldn't for an instant be without it. But if Deleuze has a point, our stutterers, the sonneteer, Roland, Richard's Queen, even Hamlet himself, are digging deeper, cracking open convention, facing the destruction of the self, risking everything. This is what Deleuze says. When a language is so strained that it starts to stutter, or to murmur or stammer, then language in its entirety reaches the limit that marks its outside and makes it confront silence. That outside is what Lacan calls the real, and it shadows the speaking being, paradoxically, from both outside and inside. How then can we greet it but with the tongue-tied silence that interrupts the flow of discourse? In an exceptionally untranslatable passage, Jean-François Lyotard, most Lacanian of philosophers, draws attention to the two related meanings of the Latin infans. On the one hand, dumb, speechless, or lacking in eloquence. On the other, belonging to a small child. Let us call infantia, Lyotard says, that which does not speak to itself. An infancy that is not a stage of life and that does not pass. It haunts discourse. Discourse perpetually pushes it aside, but persists just the same in constituting it as lost. If childhood lives on in this muteness, that's not although, but because it lodges with the adult. The Lacanian real is not just brute materiality, although it is that. It's also the experience, sensations and fears of a condition that inhabits materiality without recourse to difference, cogitation, reasoning, explanation. Desire, rooted in the unconscious, harks back to that condition, in the dependency of the infant, at one with its carer, and frighteningly separable from the security it relies on. Loss and the fear of loss is always held in reversion, always in the process of coming back to the subject. Eloquence, by contrast, is born in the imperative to master the real. But the experience of the real is only driven underground, never wholly surmounted, and it comes to the surface as what's missing from language in a muteness that acknowledges the great crises of desire and grief, anxiety and death.